Hey guys, welcome back to another art video. So this video is gonna be a Speckletone coloring series, and all these papers I tore out of my Speckletone swatch book, and I mentioned that I did want to draw on each of them, so that's mainly what took so long, drawing on each one of these Speckletone papers. So there are a total of 15 different tones, and so what I'm gonna do is I'm going to color 3 of them in each series. So I'm gonna have like one video coloring just the first 3, and then the second video coloring in the second 3 and the third 3, and so on. Apart from these tones, they also had 5 regular tones at the end. These are still included in the Speckletone, but I don't understand why, because there really isn't any texture to it. It just looks like plain construction paper, so I chose not to include these in the Speckletone series, but definitely all of these will be included. Before I start, I just want to mention that I did manage to catch a cold from last night's blizzard, so please excuse that. So the 3 papers that I'm coloring on are Starch White, Starch Rain, that has like a bit of a blue kind of undertone, and Starch Mint, which has a bit of a green undertone. So what I did with these Speckletone papers is I drew my character in different scenes, and I did take out 3 of the papers that were my favorite, and I decided to do something else with them. So the 3 of them that I took out were the Cream Speckletone, Sand, and also Oatmeal. They were pretty much like really textured, and I liked the undertone of them, so I decided to draw self-portraits on them so that I could use them for like either profile pictures here and there or like other cover photos. And the tools that I'm using are a combination of water-based and alcohol markers, also the occasional white Jelly Roll pen, and some other miscellaneous markers. So pretty much mostly the alcohol markers I was using were my Mepsi and my Pro markers, because those are the only 2 markers I have the full set of. And I did throw in some Trias, and I did use the Winsor Newton brush markers a little bit. And my water-based markers that I used were the Distress markers and the Zig Art and Graphic Twin. So what I pretty much liked doing was first doing like a base coloring of like the entire image in just alcohol markers, and then using the water-based markers to get some detailed shading in there. But it wasn't the best idea in some places, I guess, because I mentioned before that when I was using water-based markers on Speckletone paper, it makes this like grainy sort of look. So it's not the best to use it all the time, but I found that it works for if you're coloring in clothing or pretty much anything that's not smooth, so anything other than skin or like very smooth surfaces. So the subject matter, I actually drew in my character from my graphic novel. The graphic novel I'm working on is called The Crest. It's about this girl that originally is a peasant, but then the story like takes her through her journey of being a mercenary fighter. So it's mainly influenced from like the war games that I used to play when I was small, so like Warcraft, and I don't know how many of you remember Warlord's Battlecry, but that was probably my favorite war game when I was little. I just liked all the characters and all the resources that the game had. I actually have the first 30 pages of my graphic novel posted on my website, so if you guys want to check that out and see if the story might be interesting for you to follow, then you can go ahead and do that. So the first drawing is just her standing on a mountain, like how I usually draw her. And the second one, she's riding a wyvern. A wyvern is sort of like a dragon, but without the legs and the hands, and also the belly. It's just like a snake with bat wings and a dragon head. Although I did forget to draw in the dragon wings, I guess we'll just pretend that they're flapping downwards in that picture, but yeah, I can't believe I forgot that. Anyway, so the third one, she is with a sprite. A sprite is sort of like a fairy, but it's much bigger than a fairy. It's It's about the size of a person's head, so it's like definitely big enough to notice. Usually fairies are like microscopic and no one can really tell that it's a fairy. They usually mistake fairies for bugs, but a sprite's much bigger than that. Some of the colorings didn't end up getting recorded because my battery kept dying. It died after I was done with every coloring, so it died 3 times in this whole video, and I had to keep recharging it. And usually when it was low on battery, then the video would stop recording by itself, but I wouldn't know because it doesn't make any like sound or anything, so I would just keep coloring, and then after a while I noticed that it's not recording it, so I had to take a break while the battery charges. And in that time frame I sort of like fine-tuned some of the coloring, so not all of it got recorded, but most of it still did. So something I didn't mention was that these Speckletone swatch papers have different finishes. So that means like once they make the paper, then they apply a finish to the surface of the paper that makes it unique. So there's a starch smooth finish, which is probably just like how a regular type of paper feels like. And then there's original vellum, which feels almost glossy. So only one of the papers that I was coloring on today was the original vellum. That was the starch mint. So it was the one with the sprite in it, and I did notice a difference in like the markers I was using. So I was coloring the characters in with pro markers and the background in with the sky with Mepsi markers, because it has a brush tip that could cover a larger area. And what I noticed was that the sky looked very, like the ink from the Mepsi marker looked very grainy, which is usually the type of thing that was happening with my water-based markers, so I didn't understand why it was happening with the Mepsi markers, but it was probably because the paper had this weird glossy finish. And also when you apply a lot of ink to a thin piece of paper, the first 2 pieces of paper I was coloring on were like cardstock. So the first one was a 140-pound cardstock, the starch white. Starch rain was a 100-pound cardstock, so it didn't end up warping even though I was filling it in with color. But the third one was just an I think it was 70-pound text weight, so it was pretty thin, and so the paper started warping. To hold it down, I was trying to hold it down with my hand, and my hand started like grabbing the color straight from the paper, and I found that to be really weird because it wasn't happening when I was coloring in the first 2 images, so I was wondering why it was only happening with this one. And then I realized it was probably because of the original vellum finish that was on the paper. Yeah, that's definitely something to look out for. But the pro markers did not have, or like the Winsor Newton brush markers, they have better ink, so it did not show that same grainy effect, although that doesn't really concern me because I never even use this type of paper, or even some specialty marker papers have the same kind of very glossy finish, and I never use those papers anyway. I just use regular cardstock. When I was doing my marker comparison video, I was doing it all on 80-pound cardstock, and none of the markers that I was using showed the grainy effect that was happening for the starch mint paper. And I even managed to bring out my Cream Silk Zig Painty Fine marker to color in the sprite's wings. The marker is oil-based, so it went a little weird on this vellum paper. It went a little bit, I don't know, I guess puddly, like the glitter didn't spread out evenly. It like sort of puddled in some areas, and it looks more metallic than it does glittery. And I remember using this marker on like regular paper and it looked more glittery than metallic, so I think the metallic is just coming off of a glossy surface. And something I discovered was that the Wink of Stella pen is also made by Zig, so that makes sense that the Cream Silk pen like looks exactly like it. But the only difference is that the Wink of Stella is water-based, so the substance that the glitter is like distilled in, so it doesn't have any smell or anything. These oil-based markers have xylene, so they have a really strong smell. That was another thing that was very uncomfortable, like the marker smell that was filling up my room. I couldn't open the window or turn on the fan. I actually did manage to turn on the fan at the end because it was just getting overwhelming, but it's like there's like 4 feet of snow outside, so I kind of stopped myself from making my room a little too cold. Something I mentioned was that like Mepsi markers have a much more pungent smell than like the other markers, but really when I was coloring in these images I was using like all the different types of markers and they all kind of had the same smell intensity, just like a really uncomfortable pungent marker smell, so I couldn't really differentiate which one was worse than the other because they were all pretty bad. So that's all for part 1 of my Speckletone series. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more.